צה"ל הוא מאבד את המנהיגות של האומה. המנהיג חייב להיות ראשון להקריב, ראשון לשאת באחריות, ראשון לתקן. זה המבחן הפיקודי שלנו היום. לא רק לעסוק במה שלא היה, אלא להוביל למה שיהיה. זהו צו המוסרי שלנו, מקצועי ולאומי. וזו המורשת הבן גוריונית שאנו משמרים ומקדמים.
That brief clip was of IDF Chief of Staff Eyal Zamir speaking yesterday, on Wednesday, at a ceremony marking 52 years since the passing of Israel's founding Prime Minister, David Ben-Gurion. That last line is a zinger. Quote, "That is Ben-Gurion's legacy, and that we are preserving and promoting," closed quote. Let me give you a bit of context. David Ben-Gurion is revered for many reasons, among them inventing the phrase mamlachtiyut. There is no direct translation to English. Mamlachtiyut captures the ethos of Israel's founders, their vision, the overriding purpose of founding a nation state to be a safe haven for Jewish people who've been persecuted and cast out of so many countries and empires over millennia. The idea underlying the state, security, liberty, equality, and a pledge to always stand together, shoulder to shoulder, leave no one behind. That is the glue of Israeli society, the understood contract between nation and citizen. You serve, and we will catch you if you fall. We will wait for you if you stumble. And that was the prevailing ethos until October 7th. As we've explored and discussed for the last 2 years on this podcast and in our written content, this founding ethos is threatened today. And in recent weeks, the epic national clash around this ethos, the fundamental value of the state, has kind of become a bit of a public spectacle in the worst way, reflected in the open tension between Minister of Defense Israel Katz and the IDF Chief of Staff Eyal Zamir. Yesterday, when making the comments we started with, Zamir was clearly rebuking Minister Katz in very sharp code. He was saying, do not politicize the IDF. He warned, do not micromanage the men and women who put their lives on the line to fulfill our founding existential promise. Do not go there. State of Tel Aviv regular guest Ya'akov Katz and I get into this very troubling development and more in this episode. We spoke on Wednesday morning before Zamir made these remarks. I held the publication of this episode a day because Zamir's comments were just too important. And for that reason, please indulge me while I read you a few paragraphs from the complete address. I quote, "Command responsibility is the ability to continue onward, forward, with confidence, with integrity, and with humility, even when it is difficult. Military leadership is the willingness to bear the burden before everyone else. And as Ben-Gurion believed, leadership is the ability to bear a burden, even when the burden feels unbearable. This burden is ours, and it is a privilege, a burden we carry. I carry it. This is command responsibility that cannot be transferred or shared. Command responsibility is to rebuild. This is the central essence of leadership. The IDF is the nation's leadership factory. The leader must be first to sacrifice, first to bear responsibility, first to fix. This is the test of our command today, not only to deal with what was not, but to lead toward what will be. This is our moral, professional, and national imperative, and this is Ben-Gurion's legacy that we preserve and advance. It is a central component of our ability to endure. The IDF was born as an army of the people, and it is a remarkable mosaic. The army and defender of the Jewish state, drawing the strength from the people and operating simply for the people. In other words, Eyal Zamir said to Minister of Defense, stop cutting our grass. Get out of the way. I'm Vivian Berkovich former Canadian ambassador to Israel. Let's do this. Wednesday, November 26th, just after 10 a.m. in Israel. Ya'akov Katz, wonderful to see you. Thanks for joining us.
Great to be with you, Vivian, as always.
Thanks. And great to be with you. So let's dive right into it, shall we? We've had a number of we always have concerning developments here. But what I want to focus on today, Yaakov, is first, there's this brewing, quite serious tension between the Minister of Defense, Israel Katz, the Chief of Staff of the IDF, Eyal Zamir, who, of course, was appointed about 8 months ago by Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. And this has kind of exploded into the public sphere, so to speak. And it looks like the Prime Minister has called both men into the principal's office, his office, for a chat.
Separately.
Yes. Initially, it was going to be together. That was very traumatic. But he decided to do it separately. And apparently they were lovely, fun chats last night. Yaakov, just explain what's going on here and from where and why the tension arises between Minister Katz and Chief of Staff Eyal Zamir.
You know, I wish it was straightforward and it was simple, but like everything in this country, it's ridiculous. I mean, and before I go into what's happening, Vivian, I just think it's important just to set the table for a moment. We have soldiers as we speak behind enemy lines in Syria. We have soldiers as we speak behind enemy lines in Lebanon. Just this week, you had a bombing in the Dahia neighborhood in Beirut, the killing of Hezbollah's military commander, number 2 in the organization, potential for a escalation with Lebanon and with Hezbollah. In Gaza, you have soldiers who are still deployed. There still are terrorists within the area, but within the yellow line. There are major threats. There was a massive operation overnight in the northern West Bank. There's so much going on. And we have people who are fighting like little children. I'm sorry. So I just want to say that's number one. Okay. Now, what specifically is happening is that the IDF Chief of Staff, Eyal Zamir, when he was appointed as the commander of the military, and he replaced Herzi Halevi, who was the IDF Chief of Staff from October 7th until earlier this year, Herzi Halevi, one of the first things that he did shortly after the war began was appoint different teams to investigate different parts of the military. So the Air Force, the intelligence, the operations directorate, the Southern Command, etc. Those panels, those teams launched their investigations. Some of it was released to the public. Some of it was not. When Zamir replaced him, Herzi and Zamir had a conversation and they agreed. And actually, Herzi Halevi recommended to Eyal Zamir, who then decided to do it, to set up a new team to take another look and review all of these different commissions and little investigation teams that had been set up by the previous chief of staff. That was the Turjman Committee, right? Led by a former head of the Southern Command, Turjman, who then launched those investigations and looked again at everything within the IDF. They finally finished and completed their job, presented their findings to the chief of staff, and Eyal Zamir accepted those findings, and as a result, decided last week to punish a number of senior officers in the military. Some of them had already stepped down. So Aaron Khalifa, Oded Basiuk, Yaron Finkelman, this is the head of the military intelligence, head of the operations director, head of the Southern Command. They'd already left the army. They'd already stepped down. But he decided to basically punish them by saying, you will no longer be called ever for reserves. Okay, not a huge punishment, but a stain on their career. Other officers like Tomer Bar, the head of the Air Force, he told him, he put a citation, not a positive one, a negative one, like inside his file for what happened with the Air Force on October 7th. And he's anyhow on his way out. Comes Israel Katz, the defense minister, no relation, by the way, to anyone wondering, and says to Eyal Zamir, I don't accept these new findings. This isn't good for me. I want to do another review of everything. I want to take the ombudsman, the comptroller of the defense establishment, and have him look at everything once again. Zamir struck back, accused Katz of political interference, of undermining the military's preparedness. Katz is also freezing senior promotions. And here we go. We're on the roller coaster once again. I just want to zoom back out again, though, and point out something that is just super important for people to keep in mind. The IDF has investigated itself not once, but twice. The ministers, which include Israel Katz, the cabinet, the political echelon, has investigated itself 0 times, right? So now what does Israel Katz want to do? He wants to get the military to be investigated a 3rd time, right? This isn't by coincidence. This is by design.
Absolutely. And in addition to the litany of issues that this kind of clash raises, it also, yes, as Eyal Zamir says, it smacks of political interference into the IDF, and it compromises the IDF's independence. And yes, there are many issues of concern within the IDF, but there are also many issues of concern within the government. But at least publicly maintain the perception and appearance of the IDF operating independently, the IDF being given the latitude to make decisions about the security of the nation that are in the best interests of the security of the nation and not compromised or modified because they might somehow interfere with a political interest, right?
100%. I mean, what's happening here, I think we have to look at in 2 different ways. On the one hand, this is the government's attempt and continued attempt to prevent any investigation of themselves, right, or of itself. The ministers from Benjamin Netanyahu down to the lower ranking ones, but of course, including Israel Katz, do not want a state commission of inquiry. That we know, right? They have been doing everything they can to prevent its establishment. The most they've done so far is Netanyahu appointed a group of ministers, now 10, to review and think about what would be the mandate and who of a government-appointed commission of inquiry, right? This is not
Right.
a state commission of inquiry. We could talk, if you'd like, about the difference between the two.
I
But
do want to get yeah, I do want to get into that, but carry on.
okay, so but this is number one. This is their attempt to avoid that. So keep the focus on the IDF. They're
Yeah.
the ones who messed up. They are to blame for October 7th. They are the ones who failed, not us. So keep the spotlight on the officers, on the people wearing uniform, and not have it rise up to the government. So by doing this, by saying I don't accept your investigation, even though it's already the second one, even though there are now officers who have been punished, Yisrael Katz is basically saying, let's keep it contained. That's number one. Number two is I think what we have here is something that we've been seeing throughout this government's entire tenure, which started in January of 2023, pretty much, is a constant attempt for them to yes, in a democracy, the government is the sovereign and rules over the civil servants like the military, like the attorney general, but they want absolute control. This is
Right.
a just another step towards the slippery slope that we've been on already for a number of years towards authoritarianism, right? This is what they want to try to do. And yes, I mean, again, the military listens to the cabinet. That's how it works in a democracy. But this is already going too far. I mean, this is, and you see it with the attorney general, you see it with the Supreme Court. The other day, 2 days ago, I'm listening to the radio driving, and I hear an interview with Yoav Kish, the education minister, okay, also from Likud. And he's talking and talking. They keep on talking about the president of the Supreme Court, Yitzhak Amit, right, the Chief Justice of Israel. And he keeps on referring to him as Justice Amit, Justice Amit. And at one point, one of the interviewers, I think it was Kol Reshet Bet, says to him, why don't you refer to him by his title? He's the president of the Supreme Court. And Yoav Kish says, no, forget about it. And he keeps going, talking to, but he says, no, but hold on. Why don't you refer me? They push back. And he says to him at one point, it would be like me calling you Yoav Kish and not Minister of Education. And he says, listen, this is how I talk. In other words, they can't even give the guy the title, right? I mean, this is all, there's an agenda here, Vivian. And I think it all is connected together.
Yeah, I also think that it's highly unlikely that Israel Katz would go out on a limb in the way he did and challenge Eyal Zamir publicly without a tacit nod from the Prime Minister's office and the Prime Minister himself. Israel Katz may be a stalwart Likudnik, but I don't think he's much of a risk taker. And he's not the most visionary of politicians.
Sorry to laugh. I'm trying to say, yeah, they just love
Tried
the
to
way
keep
you
a
kind of
straight
just,
face.
yeah,
I
you said the way you said that with a straight face just got
I
me. No, to say the least, no, he's not. Really no charisma, not much of a character. Okay guy. I mean, there's nothing much to say about him, but he
Well,
definitely
hang
is.
on. He makes a great character on Eretz Neheret, right?
Correct.
Eretz Neheret, for those of you listening who aren't aware, is Israel's version of Saturday Night Live, and they lampoon Israel Katz really effectively. It's fun. It's fun to watch. Cool.
No, but what you're saying raises a different question, right? So if this is with the tacit approval of Netanyahu, why wouldn't Netanyahu want this to go on, right? And I think that this ties in to what we just spoke about, the bigger picture, right, of subjugating everyone under the thumb of the prime minister, of the cabinet, of the government. But also, when the kids fight, and this has always been Netanyahu's MO to some extent. Like, you look at the Likud party for a moment. People look at the Likud party and they're like, who is there that's of a caliber that you could say 1 second could one day lead the country? And you look at what Likud used to be, where there were people like Dan Meridor, Roni Milo, Benny Begin. I mean, there were, serious people. Where have they all gone? I think that Netanyahu, and I've heard this from people who have worked with him, he always wants to be Gulliver, right? He wants to be the giant among everyone else who's smaller, who's lower, who's less sophisticated, smart, whatever you want to call it. And when you have Zamir and Katz fighting, I'm the adult. I'm the guy who brings them together. I solve the problem. So it actually serves him to some extent on a political level.
No question. And he is a master manipulator at the political level. Domestically still to some degree, but I think he's losing his luster just a touch. I want to, though, focus on, we've been talking around it and poked at it, the issue of a state commission of inquiry and responsibility for not just what happened on October 7th, but the years of decision-making and policy that led to October 7th and what has transpired in the 2 years since. And I want to just step back with a bit of an anecdote. I've been working my way through online. The Israeli TV stations have testimonies from various survivors of October 7th, people who survived on kibbutz, people who were taken hostage and returned. I was watching one the other night about the Calderon family. Ofer Calderon was 54 years old, I believe, and he was released in the deal last winter. And he was taken hostage, as were two of his children, who were, I believe, 13 and 15 at the time. His older children weren't. And his former wife, Hadass Calderon, was not taken hostage, but she was on the kibbutz as well. And they were all on Nir Oz. And this was an interview with the family when Ofer was still being held hostage. And Hadass Calderon stood outside one of their destroyed homes and said, I actually have never thought much about Benjamin Netanyahu. I have no personal animosity or views until October 7th. And to this day, I'm paraphrasing, of course, and she said, he was responsible. He was in the top job. He was the prime minister. And he is the only one who's not taking any responsibility. How can this be? And I thought, well, thank you, Hadass, for sort of really distilling it all so well. And for 2 years now, this country's been waiting for Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu to take responsibility. He was prime minister. Every single decision on policy, whether it was military, intelligence, security, civil, was taken under his leadership, with maybe a few minor exceptions. And all he's really done is to come out and say, the intelligence guys, the IDF, the security infrastructure, nobody phoned me that night. Nobody phoned me to wake me up early in the morning on October 7th when they knew something might be going down. And the whole country's looking at him and saying, it's not good enough, Prime Minister. That's just not good enough. We need a state commission of inquiry. Take it away, Ya'akov.
We kind of mentioned this before, but I think you said this very clearly just now. Benjamin Netanyahu has not taken responsibility, and he will not take responsibility, right? He will not apologize. He will not say, I'm sorry, I regret, we need to look into it. It will always be what others did. It's, they didn't wake me up. As if they had woken him up, everything would have been different, right? No, I mean, there were about 15 years that led up to October 7th, if not more, that he had been prime minister. right? I mean, he was part and parcel and maybe even the architect of the policy of containment that led to the attack and this horrific assault and massacre that took place just over 2 years ago and led and dragged Israel into this really unprecedented conflict and war that still goes on. Does he deserve some credit for what's happened afterwards and the re-engineering of the Middle East? I'm happy to give him credit. But here, you can have two truths at once. You can get credit for good things and you can be blamed for the bad things. That's what happens when you are the prime minister. He's not going to have a state commission of inquiry. And I think just let's go back for a moment and explain to people 1 second the difference, right? There is a law in Israel, and it's the law of the state commission of inquiry. And this is how we investigate and we look into things that happen. So in America, for example, you had the 9/11 commission that was set up to look into 9/11. They set up ad hoc commissions. Here we have, it's a law on the books, right? This is what we did after the Yom Kippur War, the Agronat Commission. There are always going to be issues that need a state commission of inquiry. Now, what happens is they vote on it, and it passes through the government and the Knesset. And then it goes to the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, who is then tasked with appointing the chairperson of the commission, usually a former Supreme Court justice, and then the other people who will be there. So, of course, if it's a military issue, you're going to want to have someone with military experience, and intelligence issues, someone with intelligence experience. Maybe you want to have someone who's a public figure who has knowledge and understanding, who's served for a long time in government. I mean, there's a lot of criteria, and that's what they go ahead and they do. And it's independent, and it has the ability to investigate. It can subpoena everyone. It can get access to all classified information, to minutes from the cabinet, to the private security meetings that the prime minister had with his intelligence chiefs, everything, because it's all recorded, and there are transcripts of all of this kept in a safe in the prime minister's office. It can also, by the way, make personal recommendations or bad recommendations, if we call it that. In other words, it could say this person X, in our view, should no longer be able to serve as Minister of Defense, should no longer be able to serve as Chief of Staff, or failed in his or her job as the Prime Minister of Israel and shouldn't be able to serve as the Prime Minister of Israel. They could potentially do that. This is for this exact reason, Benjamin Netanyahu does not want this type of state commission of inquiry. So what is he proposing? And what is this panel of ministers that he has tasked, led by Yariv Levin, with Ben Gvir, with Smotrich, with Amichai Shikli, with Orit Shruk, with the greatest of the great of the Israeli government? What they are looking at, basically, they are going to try to come up with a mandate, an idea, a platform for this panel, this commission that's going to investigate themselves. And then it's going to, what will it investigate? Who will sit on it? How will it look? What will it do? Et cetera, et cetera. They will bring the recommendations within, I think, 45 days or so back to the government, which will review it, hold a hearing, decide whether to accept or not, and then pass some sort of resolution. So first of all, you have two things that are happening here, Viv. One is it's stalling time, right? It's just, let's buy time, 45 days, give it to the ministers. I just saw the other day, even though this was started a few days ago, they still haven't even met once. So I don't even know what's going on with it.
Yeah, not to interject for a moment. Also, within 45 days, nothing of substance can or will be done.
No, of course not. This is a classic delay tactic. You want to kill something in Israel? You do this. This is how you do it. We'll look into it. We'll get back to you in 45 days, right? Let's also remember 45 days from now puts us in, January at some point, but you also you can't ignore the political clock here, right? Because that's super important. We might be going to an election in March, right? By the end of March, Bibi has to pass a budget. If he can't pass a budget, triggers an immediate election, which means we have an election in June. There's no commission that's going to be established before then. He's going to wait to see if there's an early election or not, right? So there's a lot of other factors in this. I mean, it's ridiculous what's going on.
Yeah, it is pretty ridiculous. This is so broad, so total, so huge, October 7th, that, I would sort of flip it and say, why don't you want an inquiry? I would.
Well, you know the answer, because they know Bibi knows what they will discover. Not that he's a criminal. Again, he's not a criminal. He made decisions that he thought they were right and okay, and they were approved. And by the way, the decisions that he made, take the Qatari cash as an example that was delivered every month for Hamas, was continued by Naftali Bennett. I mean,
Yes.
It was something that was accepted, but these were decisions that he will have to own, and he doesn't want that, right? That it's simple.
Before we move on to these other topics, I just wanted to make 2 points. One, again, I'm going back to Hadass Calderon, and, she was very eloquent, again, standing outside her house, speaking. Her children weren't present. It was just her and the reporter, and she said, "I just don't understand why Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is resisting taking any responsibility." She said, "He's an intelligent man. He's a well-read man. He's intellectual. He comes from a family of great intellect. His father was a historian. He understands." And she kind of looks around and takes this sweeping view and says, "This is his legacy. This is his legacy." And talk about hitting the nail on the head. That's exactly what Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu wants to change. And I've heard that from people privately. I'm sure you have as well, people who have worked very closely with him, that he is determined to make sure that October 7th is not his legacy. And he's actually made public comments to that degree. The other thing that just kind of, popped into my head when you were speaking earlier, Ya'akov, is the comment that Benjamin Netanyahu made several days before October 7th when he met with his top security and intelligence and military officials in what sounds like a kind of, not casual, but a holiday meeting over the holiday. And he was being briefed on what was going on at the time. Of course, Huwara, an Arab town in the northern part of the West Bank, had become a real hotbed. There had been attacks on Jews driving through the city. And that was really the focus at the time of his government. We have to get control of things in Huwara. No one seemed to be terribly concerned with a potential Hamas attack. And at that meeting, Prime Minister Netanyahu made a very interesting comment about Golda Meir, who had been the subject, as you mentioned earlier, of a state commission of inquiry following the 1973 war. And it was called the Agranat Commission. Set the table. What did Benjamin Netanyahu say?
Benjamin Netanyahu, as you said correctly, had convened, like we often do. You have a meeting of the top ministers, the prime minister, the defense minister, with the top military and intelligence folks, looking at just everything. The country kind of slows down for the holidays, and it's important to look at all the different fronts, get an update on where things stand. Huwara was viewed as a potential hotspot. For that reason, by the way, the IDF, for example, took some of the forces that were deployed along the border with Gaza and actually moved them on the Friday to the West Bank to try to help keep things quiet there. The military is, limited in its resources, and every indication was Gaza was going to be quiet, right? Sinwar had basically ordered people to stop the protests along the border. Every indication that Israel had was that they wanted economic prosperity. They wanted quiet. So that was the prevalent assessment. We're not going back to that. What happened in this meeting, though, Netanyahu's sitting around the meeting. I think they're wearing jeans, very laid back, casual. And at one point they're getting things. He says, "Listen, I want you to check everything once again. I do not want to be Golda." Right. And his reference was, "I don't want to be surprised. I don't want to find myself on a holiday where we are suddenly in a surprised attack and I turned into Golda Meir, who..." Now, here's what we don't know, right, Vivian? When he said Golda, I don't want to be Golda that I don't want the country to be surprised. I don't want us to be drawn into war. I don't want to be Golda that I have to step down after a war and the interim findings of the Agranat or whatever the commission to come will publish. I would venture to say that it was probably a mix of both, right? It was obviously, I don't want us to be surprised and be attacked, but I also personally don't want to be Golda Meir, right? And Netanyahu has done everything he can ever since October 7th to avoid becoming a new Golda Meir.
To avoid becoming a new Golda Meir, to avoid taking responsibility, and to change people's perceptions of October 7th, which are so deeply embedded. And for good reason. You were the prime minister on October 7th. Step up.
One thing that's just interesting to look back, because history is always, I find it fascinating because it informs us and can be some sort of comparison or reflection of where we are today. But back in 1973, 25 days after the war ended, the Agranat Commission was established, right? But the Agranat Commission It's interesting when you look back at it, its mandate was actually quite limited. When Golda Meir's government established it, it was meant to focus really on the military, on the intelligence agencies. She, of course, was subpoenaed and appeared before it, as did Moshe Dayan and others, but it wasn't meant to make necessarily personal recommendations about her. When the findings came out, and she, by the way, this is the other thing that's fascinating. The war was in October. She won the election in December of 73. She won. Now, of course, media was different then, and the investigations, everything was different in what people knew and accountability. But she won the election by a big one against Menachem Begin. Comes mid 74, the Agranat Commission, already a few months in, publishes its initial findings and obviously rips into the chief of staff, into the heads of intelligence. She almost got away with it. But what did she decide to do? And this is what's incredible. She took responsibility and she stepped down. And she said, yes, they didn't tell her that she has to step down. They said that about the other people. But she said, I was prime minister. I am stepping down. It's a level of responsibility that, wow, I mean, we can only dream of at this point where we are in Israel. And its integrity. And you know what? This is the other thing that I think you'll probably agree with me. People are like, why does it make a difference? I mean, to me, it's accountability. The taking of responsibility speaks to the values of our society. How can we expect young soldiers to do what's right when we have a compulsory military service? How can we expect people to take responsibility for their actions on the streets or on the roads or even in their own homes when they look above and they see that all of what our leaders do, our political leaders do, is try to run away and evade that responsibility? This is about the soul of a nation.
Thank you. I couldn't put it any more strongly and powerfully. I totally agree with you. This is about the soul of the nation. And the soul of the nation is in a kind of really deep state of malaise right now. So I want to just focus briefly on the soul. We learned, apropos the conduct of the military in recent days, that Hamas, for years, apparently had a squad of about 2,500 people who worked day in, day out, full time on monitoring social media accounts of Israeli soldiers, both conscripts and reservists. And by doing so, were able to glean seemingly trivial information that actually, when aggregated with everything, became significant. They developed an incredibly rich storehouse of knowledge, visual and, written communication. And they deployed that on October 7th. We're told in reports that Hamas, this squad of 2,500 social media warriors, that they were overseeing or mining information from more than 100,000 IDF soldiers. And the use of phones and other electronic devices by soldiers seems to be completely undisciplined. So I want you to comment on that, but I also would like you to move into the kind of bombshell disclosure. There was a significant and particular intelligence or piece of intelligence that Hamas was able to glean from this very disciplined work that is mind-blowing.
Yeah. I mean, this is just another one of those pieces, and this just came out this week on Galei Tzahal on Army Radio by Daron Kadosh, who's their military reporter, which was really a bombshell of a report. And it spoke about how, like you said, they had several thousand people who were really watching everything from Facebook to Instagram to other social media channels, TikTok. We're looking at who soldiers are, which accounts, and then trying to pick up as much information as they could and then piece that puzzle together. So soldier makes a TikTok near his tank. Soldier takes a selfie and posts on Instagram near, some other sort of weapon system. And then starting to put that whole puzzle together in an incredible way. I mean, Sisyphean to one extent, but on the other hand, brilliant. And it shouldn't really come as much of a surprise because we do know how Hamas diligently collected intelligence on Israel, understood how we were operating along the border, had a real finger on the pulse of the nation, understanding what were the triggers, how much hostages would impact us, how to use those hostages in a very abusive but effective way for psychological warfare. So they were much smarter than we thought. In this case, this intelligence that they gathered, according to this report, which is crazy, gave them an understanding of the Merkava Mark IV tank. Now, for people to understand just one moment, the Merkava tank is Israel, most of its big military platforms buys from the United States or buys from Germany. So boats, submarines, Germany, aircraft, the United States. The one big platform that we make on our own is the Merkava tank. It's very sophisticated, very advanced. It's not just a tank. It's like a fighter jet in a tank. It's super electronically systems, navigation, guidance, weapons, target acquisition, you name it. They apparently figured out what is the deactivation, the kill switch for Merkava tank. And they were able to use that come October 7th. Personally, not aware of this story until now, until this just came out the other day. Really says something about what they knew about us and how we were so not aware, but it also speaks to something that we spoke about just briefly offline, which is so important. We need better rules for soldiers when it comes to their mobile devices when they're in service or on base or in operations. I mean, listen, the Israeli military has a problem with discipline altogether, right? It's always been a problem. It's a cultural issue. It has to do with Israeli society, but it also has to do with the fact that we're a people's army. It's tough to have that type of discipline like you would see, for example, in the U.S. Armed Forces. But with that said, I mean, this is real, right? And we have to take this more seriously. So I think there have been steps, and you're familiar with this you spend time with troops, and you can't publish photos of them anymore. And that used to be, you can't mention names of people anymore like we used to be able to. So there have been steps that have been taken, but we need much more control.
I'm going full on this one. I would say like no personal devices allowed on base, period, or while you're in active duty. That you get to the base, you put it in a box and it's locked up. End of discussion.
Yeah, I can't say you're wrong.
I'm old. I grew up in an era when these things didn't exist and people survived. Maybe they'll read on their free time or talk to each other more.
I got my first cell phone back in 1998 when I was drafted into the IDF. It was one of those cool Motorola flip ones with the antenna that popped up. I thought it was the coolest thing in the world. All it could do was make phone calls, no texting, obviously nothing else. That's what it was. And you know what? Somehow we managed back with then.
We did. And I remember actually that was the same year I got my first phone. It was the same model. I remember being really diligent about pulling that antenna up. I don't think it made squat difference, frankly. Just briefly, can you explain what a kill switch is in the tank and when and why it would be used by an IDF tank crew, and exactly how Hamas was able to exploit that knowledge?
Well, I mean, you would have a kill switch. Unclear to me exactly whether it kind of disables the entire tank or just disables some of the weapon systems. I think it might be more the weapon systems of what it's able to disable. But the kill switch, essentially what it does is it makes the tank completely ineffective. And then it's no longer a fighting force and it can't really do anything to engage the enemy. So it does give Hamas something of an advantage. The tanks, though, we do have to put things into proportion. There weren't a tremendous number of tanks along the border.
How many tanks were there on the border that day?
Yeah, maybe about a dozen or so. It wasn't as if we had, battalion after battalion of tanks along the border. There were some tanks that were deployed. There were tanks that were farther away. This is all put everything into proportion. But look, they were able to kidnap soldiers and disable tanks and pull soldiers out of tanks, right? Daniel Perez's body was pulled out of a tank. Matan Agranast was one of the hostages who came back in October. He was pulled out of that same tank and taken hostage. Same with Itai Chen, right, whose body was recently returned to Israel. So they were able to take control of these tanks and take people hostage, literally from the tanks. This was just another example, unfortunately, that shows the depth of the failure that took place here. And just tying it back to what we spoke about in the beginning. Of course, the military failed. That's obvious, right? I mean, we could keep talking about that, and I think we all know that. And that's why so many officers have gone home already. That's why the military has already investigated itself twice, right? And hopefully these lessons are being applied, but we need something more holistic. We need something that looks at the entire system.
We need something holistic, and we need something that has depth and transparency where the people can watch. I think people need to see what's going on and need to have confidence. We need to rebuild confidence both in military leadership and political leadership. So, but presumably, what Hamas was able to do then is electronically activate the kill switch on the tanks, right? They didn't have to go in, obviously, physically and do it. It was done electronically.
Unclear to that information has not come out for the obvious reasons. We don't want to make public what the kill switch is and how it
Okay,
is
I'm
deactivated.
going to use my deductive powers
Right.
here because there were no Hamas guys in the tank with Matan Angrest and the others. So I'm going to assume that they were able to do that electronically. And I guess the other question that it raises is, what other capabilities does Hamas have that arises or comes from all of that research and monitoring that they did for years? And they also, I understand, created groups. They created fake groups. And, soldiers would join, believing them to be real groups.
Yeah, honey traps. This is classic stuff that they do on social media. But you know what, Vivian? Look back for a moment at October 7th. They attacked from the ground. They attacked from the air with hang gliders. They attacked from the sea. This wasn't some two-bit terrorist organization. This was a military assault. It only makes sense that they had intelligence collection, cyber capabilities, hacking capabilities. This was something that, again, and I keep on falling back on this idea. We had the information. What we lacked was the imagination of what Hamas could potentially do and what it could do to us. And that is, I think, to a great extent, one of the big failures here was Hamas was not a surprise as an enemy. We knew that they were there. We knew that they had genocidal intentions towards us. But we were stuck in a way of thinking that didn't believe that anything like October 7th was possible.
Well, let me interject because, yes, there was definitely a lack of imagination, but I'm going to also suggest that we did not have the discipline, nor did we commit the resources to that kind of intelligence gathering that Hamas was doing. We let many monitoring programs in the Gaza Strip fall to the wayside, budgetary reasons. You've commented on how on October 7th, there was not a single person, not a single asset in the Gaza Strip who made a phone call to the IDF, to the Shin Bet, and said, "We're coming. Get ready." We did not have a single asset that would give us that information. And furthermore, the kind of belief in the power of, the conceptia, the containment. We're allowing money to go into Hamas through Qatar. We believe that they just want to kind of live a nice life. Hamas is transforming into more of a kind of legit civilian government that actually cares about its people. And we've got this fence. We've got our $1 billion plus fence that is like an iron dome. So we don't, even though many of the much of the technology mounted on these fences, on this fence was inoperable. So there was this delusion. It wasn't just a lack of imagination. And yes, we had some information, but I'm going to be a little controversial here and suggest that we weren't in the same league. We just weren't taking Hamas seriously enough. We weren't monitoring them as diligently as they were monitoring us. And when we did monitor them, and the female IDF scouts who were watching them on the border in their drills reported up, they were told, Hamas hijinks. That's a lack of imagination. But there's also tremendous vacuum in terms of information that we sought and monitored. No?
I agree with everything you just said.
Okay.
Yeah.
So it's much deeper than a lack of imagination. I think it's also
a combination of all of that, no doubt.
All right. This has been way too interesting today. Ya'akov, by the way, we're both big swimmers, and he just came from a swim, and you got great post-swim energy, Ya'akov. I'm going this afternoon.
It's the chlorine. It makes me glow.
Everyone comes out of the pool, and
Because you know why? And you know this. We've spoken about this a million times. And just to the listeners, Vivian is something of a swimming coach to me. So, just so you know. But I think we all swim for a similar reason. First of all, it's healthy. It's fun. It's enjoyable. Water is great, but it does something to relax you in a way that I don't get that in any other
I
exercise.
agree. It's whole body, whole mind, and now I have to do this. I keep this by my side, and I have kept it by my side since I was 17 years old and became a lifeguard. Here we go. How retro is that?
That's
Water
cool.
safety, isn't that beautiful?
That's
Water
cool.
safety instructor. I worked so hard for that. I was a lifeguard. I was a swimming teacher, and I'm still like I peaked. I think in some ways when I was 17, but still love the water. Okay. I want to finish up very quickly. I had a long chat the other day in a podcast that's going to be released possibly with this or around the same time with Ahmed Fouad Al-Khatib, who you know well as a kind of expert on Gaza, on what's going on. He's at the Atlantic Council. And he and I were discussing how things just seem to be at an impasse, how Hamas is, as they do so well, they're kind of like actually maybe better than Bibi, how they rag the puck, run the clock, how they are buying time in order to consolidate their power, rearm, and maintain control in every way of the Gaza Strip. Quickly, your prognosis for where things are at and where we may be headed.
I think we're stuck. I mean, unfortunately, the transition to stage 2 of the Trump 20-point plan, which was supposed to see the beginning of the disarmament of Hamas, the deployment of the International Stabilization Force, the new governing entity, there's been no big progress there. The Americans are running a very tight ship, and they are trying to get this off the ground. I think there's a lot of wishful thinking. I think that there's a lot of hope. I think that the Trump strategy to some extent is let's get the Qataris and the Turks and the Egyptians to put the pressure on Hamas to get Hamas to agree to disarm, maybe in some sort of symbolic way. But what exactly, who does the disarmament? Where does it happen? What happens to the tunnels? Do they give up just some symbolic cache of rockets? Do they give up AK-47s? Unclear, and let's be very frank, they have reasserted complete control over the part of Gaza that they are in control, which is almost 50%. And then where does the ISF go? Do we think they're actually going to go into the Hamas-controlled parts of Gaza and confront Hamas? That's not going to work. So there's some idea that maybe get them to start to deploy in the Israeli side, but really you're going to see Egyptian and Saudi and Indonesian and other soldiers under the control of the IDF. I mean, so that means the IDF's going to have to pull out, whatever, Turkish, whoever it might be. I think, again, there's a lot of wishful thinking here. It's not by coincidence or chance that nothing has moved yet, because it's a bit stuck at the moment. But let's see. I think, and this is what I do hear from Americans, right? And it's interesting, is that on the one hand, we don't know it's going to work. And maybe it will. And if it does, unbelievable. But if it doesn't, we bought time. And what happens in this time is important. And this is where they're making the push for normalization with Saudi Arabia, with Indonesia, with others. If they can get some of those normalization agreements done while things are quiet, they will have brought a new benefit and maybe even a victory to the war if you get the Saudi normalization. And then what happens next? Does Israel have to go back into all of Gaza? Does Israel have to again take on Hamas? We'll see.
Well, I mean, the whole normalization dream with between Saudi and Israel, took a bit of a thump yesterday when, MBS said to President Trump, like, can't do it now. I'm sorry. My population is just too opposed to normalization with Israel because of what's going on in Gaza. So it's just going to have to wait. And Trump did not take that news well. Yaakov, let's do an election prediction. What the heck? When do you think it's going to be?
We're going all over. I don't know.
No, we're finishing now. We're finishing on a prediction. I'm going with June. It can't be later than June. When else can it be?
It could be later than June. I'll tell you why, right? If he can pass the budget, I think he'll want to pass it. And then by another 6 months, he's not going to want, I would guess, this is just a feeling, he's not going to want the election to be in October because that's too close to the anniversary. So he'll want to bring it forward maybe to the first week of September if he can. It's before Rosh Hashanah. I think Rosh Hashanah this year is like the 10th or 11th. Once you get into the Chagim, it becomes too complicated.
Yeah.
Do it before Rosh Hashanah, and then it's a month before the October 7th anniversary. You get it. Now, you can do that only if you pass the budget in March. Passing the budget in March, right now he has the votes potentially. It's a question if he can get agreement within his very complicated coalition. But if he can, I think he's going to go for it. If he can't, you're right. If there's no, and we'll know. I mean, beginning of March, we'll have an indication whether by the end of the month they're going to be able to pass the budget. And if he doesn't, we go to an election in June. If he passes the budget, my prediction would move to September. So we're going to have to hold on a bit longer to know exactly where this is going. But I mean, we have to have a different conversation, Vivian, a whole other hour where we talk about a very basic question that troubles me deeply. And I'm going to open up a huge Pandora's box now. But this is something to give people a taste for more. Why do we not have new leaders who are throwing their hats in the ring? Why when I look at the gallery of people who are running for office, it's all the same faces of those who were there and those who failed and those who came back and those who are, it's all the same people. We need new, fresh blood, leadership, faces, whatever you want to call it. And it's a question that I don't have good answers to, why we don't have those people there. To be continued.
To be continued, absolutely. It's a question that I'm asked constantly. I'm sure you are. Everybody is. Who is there other than Bibi? And I have to say, it drives me crazy. Nothing personal, Bibi, but in a country of 10 million people, he's not the only one. But why is no one stepping up? And I throw it to you and say, hey, Ya'akov, why aren't you running on someone's list for the Knesset?
Oh, no.
We're going to do an episode on
You're
that.
my friend. You're not supposed to talk that way about me. Come on.
We're going to do an episode on that. I think maybe we'll wait for the new year. And I got to get to the pool soon. So thank you so much. Wonderful discussion. And I think I'd like to schedule all of our meetings for podcasts after your swim, because it's magic.
You got it. Thanks, Vivian.
Thank you. I don't know about you, but I really enjoyed that conversation with Ya'akov. And I really am going to try to get him post-swim every time. Thanks for being here. Until next time. We love hearing from you, so please comment on our website, stateoftelaviv.com, or send us a note to hello@stateoftelaviv.com. On behalf of the State of Tel Aviv core team, Yon Zabo, our creative, graphic, visual, and marketing man, Amir White, producer and editor extraordinaire, sound guy, who is also impressively patient with me and my boomer tech deficiencies, and our social media manager, who pitches in on everything, Maya Naftalin. Thanks to the team. Thanks to you for being here.